And I would like to welcome, and I think in a true fashion, welcome back Erna Allant, who has been with us before, and we're delighted that you're back with us, Erna. And I was saying to a few people that I know you've been unwell, so it's even better that you're feeling better to be with us today. I'll give Erna is a wonder. Erna has been in the field for a while. Erna has done lots of important direct work with people. Erna is past president of Isaac International and all kinds of things, and has written maybe my favorite book on AAC, which I don't have in my hotel room right now. Otherwise, I'd bring it up and show you, about participation and engagement. And actually, the way I came to ask Erna to do this for us today was I was reading your blog around friendship and users of AAC and their peers, and I thought, oh, that's a perfect topic. We need to have Erna talk to us about that topic. So I am delighted that you're here, and I know that everyone who is on the call today will be enriched by your presentation. I'll just give a little bit of guidelines. I'm going to watch the chat, and I'm going to keep look for questions that if they really need to be asked at the moment, I will. Otherwise, there is time that's going to be left at the end, so you can ask your questions of Erna directly with your voice or through the chat, whatever choice you make, and we'll engage with that then. But Erna, without any other ado, and I could talk about you much longer, but I want to have you talk. I will turn it over to you, and very, very pleased that you're here with us today.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I really, very happy to be with you all again. So, yes, our topic today is friendships between users of AAC and their peers. So before we start, I want you to look at this picture that you have in front of you. Both these pictures were taken in my recent trip when I went to South Africa. I spent a couple of days at the beach. And one of the evenings, I was walking outside, and it was towards the evening. And I looked at people on the beach, and those sort of obviously swimming in the sea, which you can see the first one is about people in the sea, and the second one is about two little girls who were walking on the beach, basically looking at pebbles, picking up shells. And it really dawned on me how wonderful it is. The wonderful thing about being on vacation or on holiday is that you see people together in a very relaxed context. These are people, these people who are swimming in the sea were not necessarily people who obviously know each other. But they were engaged, they were sort of relaxed, they were able to be together in close proximity and actually really enjoy being with each other. And I thought to myself, this is what makes holidays and times that you have sort of to relax very special, is the ability that there's no pressure. You can be with others and just enjoy being with them. And the other picture about the two little girls, I'm not sure whether they knew each other or whether they were just friends that they picked up on the beach, but it's the same thing. There was no pressure. These two little ones were were walking on the beach, picking up stuff. They weren't necessarily engaging in any big way, but there was obviously great joy derived from this. So I want you to keep these images with you as I go through the presentation. I'll definitely come back to this. Okay, so let me just get on here. So what I'm going to talk about today first of all, I'm going to start talking about elements of friendship. What are the most important aspects, elements that we actually can identify from research that are sort of important in friendships? And what is friendship? In other words, what is friendship really? Then I'm going to talk about different types of friendships and levels of meaning making. I'm going to link this to the levels of meaning making that I developed in the book. Now, I'm very well aware that everybody, on this call is not necessarily familiar with my work on meaning making, but for those who are, it would add an additional level of depth. And for those who aren't, I'm going to try very briefly to sort of give you the adequate background so that, you can actually follow what I'm doing. And then finally, I'm going to talk about intervention guidelines. So the definition and elements of friendship that I want to talk about is based on the definition that the Arc of Massachusetts gave. And this is, it's a voluntary and reciprocal relationship in which students exhibit mutual attachment to one another, frequent proximity and companionship, and obviously enjoyment and affection between them. This is important, because when we're talking about friendship, we're not talking about something you or I can induce. It's not something that you or I can encourage children to become friends. It's something that needs to grow on a voluntary basis from the kids themselves, which makes it really quite a difficult field to promote or to use in intervention. So it requires a different kind of skill from us. So the elements of friendship, the basic point is, first of all, it's voluntary. It's spontaneous. And I think this is very important because I think there's so many programs already that indicate that the moment you have a program to develop friendship between children, oftentimes, it might work while the program lasts, but it doesn't really do anything beyond that. The second point is it's reciprocal. It really needs to be based on responsiveness between the two kids that are involved. And it requires us to be very careful in actually looking to see which of the partners that they interact with might have the potential for friendship. There need to be mutual attachment. We're looking for caring attitudes here between kids. And, we need to observe that. Whether when one child is not at school today, do the other kid really notice that? Is it something that the child immediately realizes? And that's a very positive indication then, as an element of the ability to develop friends. Proximity, obviously, people who like to be together very often are close together. They try and deviate, sitting together. And this is the other problem. If we want to look at friendships, we need to be able to assess what kids, or what students in the classroom a particular child likes to interact with. And if we used assigned seating all the time, it becomes impossible. And so the proximity and choice of proximity, I think, is very important. Companionship, obviously, is the choice of doing something together with people like those two kids on the beach. It's spontaneous. It's their selection. It's basically innate, something that they basically initiate themselves in order to sort of play or in order to engage with another child. Obviously, there's a lot of enjoyment derived from this. And this element of affirming is a really important one. Friendships are affirming. And the moment we start looking in a classroom to link kids up in contexts like peer tutoring and that kind of stuff, They're not congenial necessarily for friendships because there's an asymmetrical relationship and we assign roles to the kids that is not necessarily conducive to interacting with each other on an equal basis. And the last one is there must be an affinity, there must be an emotional sort of responsiveness, emotional resonance, and empathy for each other. So by looking at the elements, I think one already has an idea of what are the kinds of things that one can do in order to make children aware of friendships and facilitate development of friendship with others. So from this, I think, it's clear that friendship is about social closeness. It's about the level of, and the level of social closeness that you have with somebody is obviously also indicative then of your personal involvement with that person. So authenticity of friendships is a really, really important issue here. I think I alluded to the fact that it has to be spontaneous. It has to come from the child. And it has to be natural and spontaneous, has to be open and honest and true to self. So this is a problem we'll talk about later in the whole issue of masking in autism. Kids with autism basically stating that it's very difficult for them to make friends because they feel that the way in which they expected to make friends almost is alienating from themselves. Authenticity in friendships, you and I know, you can immediately pick up if somebody is not himself in an interaction with you. And that does not bode well for the development of trust and mutual sort of friendships. The second point there is that there are different types of friendships that we need to acknowledge. You need friends to walk with on the beach, like with this child. Sometimes, you just need friends to go on lunch with. And obviously that would be more sort of discussing, perhaps a bit socially closer sort of lunch interaction. There's frequency differences in our friends that are actually really important. It doesn't always mean that a good friend is somebody that you want to see very often. In fact, oftentimes that's not the case. So there's this continuum of social closeness and intimacy where you can, and I think most of us do, have a range of friends on this level of social intimacy, from being, perhaps more distant to close. But the common denominator there is, these are people that I choose to be with for one reason or the other. And if we start looking at children and their development of friendships, I think this is another very important thing to remember. I think sometimes kids really do have friends, but because our definition of friendship is besties, people that they want to be with all the time, we miss the very important markers of friendship development in our children. Okay, so just to recap, obviously there's a big link between the way developing friendships and the way we make meaning in interaction with people. You have engagement, ability to be present and attentive to somebody. And then you have, on the other side, you have participation, which is basically the ability to use symbols in order for you to be able to communicate and engage with people. And then in the middle, we have nuanced meaning, basically the ability for us to respond to somebody and then in the process of our interaction, develop something new with them that's unique to the kind of interaction that we have, and therefore unique in terms of our relationship. Sometimes people refer to this as an inside joke. You have to develop an inside joke. And the idea of an inside joke that only you and them actually you and the other person share is a great idea. However, the moment you start talking about you have to develop an inside joke, it becomes another strategy. And one has to be very careful. Building friendships is not about developing strategies for friendship. Because the moment you do it, you end up with this sort of, again, the inauthenticity of the relationship, because you are doing something to affect something rather than actually moving into the person and just enjoy being with the person. Okay, so here are the different levels of meaning that are identified in the book. And why this is important is because a different level of meaning is reflective of how engaged you are with a person, and also obviously in terms of how sort of you're able to participate. In other words, your level of skill in using codes or your communication device to communicate. So level 1 is formalistic meaning, which means very minimal engagement. So it's very fleeting contact. You can think of the swimming in the bathing. There's not much contact between people. They just enjoy being, but it's an incredibly important first step in developing friendship. The fact that you want to be with people, you just want to be with them. You don't need anything else. The second level of meaning is the literal meaning, where you engage for short periods of time. And again, it's not extensive periods, but you start sharing something that at least has some level of enjoyment in it. Sometimes it's singing a song, sometimes it's playing on the trampoline, and these two kids just have fun on the trampoline together. That's great. It could be fleeting, but there's something there that goes beyond just being together. The third level is the one of, more extended meaning. Obviously here, the social closeness factor is becoming sort of much more to the fore. You want to engage with somebody for a continuous basis. And so it becomes very important that students become more self-aware of others. How do they, emotional sort of understanding of how people could get upset, because this enhances the ability to get closer to another student. And then the last level of meaning is versatile meaning, which is where you're able to very skillfully basically go from level 1 to level 4. You've got people you can be very close to, you have develop very basic BFFs, best friends, that you want to be with all the time and that you can talk to and that support you. But at the same time, you're also very comfortable in varying your level of social closeness in the people that you want to be with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these four different levels of meaning and go through what's the implication for friendship for each of these. So the first one is formalistic meaning, and as I explained already, you've got minimal engagement, but you actually quite enjoy being together. That's very important, and it's so important for us to remember in terms of dealing with children who are very difficult. We oftentimes neglect starting at the beginning here, and then very surprised that the kids don't relate to other students. But this is actually a very important basis, is how do I get a child just to be relaxed in the presence of others, and that other people also can become comfortable with this child. So this is the friendship level 1. It's acquaintance. I mentioned, I call it acquaintance level, where you have brief, superficial, there's nothing personal going on here. And actually, it could be quite neutral. but that it's an inoffensive being together. So there's no real engagement. It's very fleeting. It's almost like accidental interaction. And it can be characterized by highly routinized interactions. I mean, greetings or whatever, passing each other in the passage. But it's congenial kind of interaction. Very little personal engagement. And participation is largely parallel because there's no real interaction happening. So how do we sort of intervene? How do we try and facilitate this? First of all, people can't actually be together if they're not in close proximity. So in order to enhance any friendship, we need to make sure the kids are in the same place. And increase the frequency with which they are in each other's company. It needs to be a congenial context. The state of being where kids are in is very important. It's like the picture of the people swimming. It has to be pleasant. And it doesn't need to be pleasant in a way that it's hurrah, hurrah, but the point is it has to be an atmosphere that is congenial for kids to just sit and sort of observe each other, because that's so important. And just be together, because they're not just going to be, they're going to observe each other. And they're going to sort of start interacting with each other in one way or the other. Acknowledging self in other, this is another important thing. Obviously, while a kid is on level 1, acquaintance, we want a kid to start looking at other kids. We want a kid to start observing other children. And in order to do that, we want to start noticing stuff to encourage the kid. Peter's got a nice hat on today. In order for the kid to draw the kid into observing others, create some interest. And then obviously, gradually, we want to increase the time that the kids want to sort of just be with other kids. And, Phoebe Caldwell, in her books, I actually have a couple of references, actually sort of really describes this process in quite a bit of detail of how do you go about, if a child is agitated and a child is difficult and doesn't have friends, how do you go about starting on level 1, just getting to be with a child, the student, in order to sort of let him experience the joy of just being. No demands, but knowing there's somebody else with him that is non-threatening and that is just sort of somebody that he might start enjoying interacting with. Okay, so the second level is literal meaning, where there's short periods of involvement. And here we're talking about a collegial friendship. So the friendship is sort of a little bit better, but there's not really much social connection or sort of social closeness. This is where you have short exchanges between participants. Kids could actually interact with each other, and quite in an authentic way. You also see this oftentimes when parents or, interact with their kids. They might do a familiar story or whatever. There's a lot of repetition, but oftentimes there's a split second where there's actually really something happening in interaction with the kid that you can see is not just routinized. This is something that goes beyond routinized. And this is what we're talking about here. Again, there's a awareness of self and others that's developing. And we can enhance this on many levels, because by making kids aware of, this is something he likes to do, but you don't like that. Because you prefer something else, don't you? Yes. Beginning awareness of who she's interacting with, making kids aware that today you played with Peter. I could see that you quite like this. Did you? Short periods of engagement, a glance or a smile, these are very important. Your observations are incredibly important in order to help kids sort of follow on their own intuitive signals in terms of interaction with others. So more turn taking on this level. You want to start share more actions or information, but encourage the kids to do more things together and to extend their interactions. You want to provide a free choice of partners. Now, this is a very important thing. At level 2, you want the kids to start becoming a bit more aware of who they want to play with. And again, if we don't give a choice of where the child sits, who the child sits with, who the child actually wants to go and play with, you want to ask somebody to help dish out these pencils or whatever. We can't expect the kid to develop a preference for sitting or playing with anybody. And particularly in self-contained classrooms, it's a huge problem because every child has got a para-educator next to him. And quite honestly, you can't develop friendships through a third person. And this is something I'll come back to, but it is very important that we sort of realistically look at what we do and whether that's in any way congenial to helping kids develop friends. Okay, so there's a lot of observing that we need to do. In fact, there's an article I just saw today, brand new, in the AAC journal that talk about a scoping review of the playground experiences of children with AAC needs. They went to the playgrounds. I was so happy when I saw this because in our field, we do so little observation of kids in natural environments in order to know how to go about enhancing friendships. And the one thing, of course, that came out of the study, but we don't really know what to do. But this is it, observation is our strongest skill that would give us insight into how to go and promote friendships in particular, in these cases. And again, I talk about noticing absence, because if a kid comes in and looks for a friend, that's a very good indication of something caring going on there. And it's a very positive element that we actually need to identify as such. Okay, thirdly, extended meaning, which is now more extensive interactions, where people become, kids become more interested in the other, they have a preference, they can start acting for a longer period of time. And so preference in the interaction patterns is becoming quite evident. And oftentimes the interactions here transcend the context, so they become more reciprocal. They like to be together at lunchtime. They like to go out and play. They like to be together in the classroom or not. But oftentimes students at this level really want to be together. The quality of the interaction is changing because they're becoming more mutually sensitive and proving more responsive. And oftentimes this is when kids can engage in one full thematic play together. I also want to say that, oftentimes kids can be friends at school and not at home because the opportunity for going and playing at home obviously is beyond school. But I think it's really, really important that we involve parents early on in the whole process of the importance of friendship development. Quite honestly, I think there's quite a lot of literature to actually confirm that. I mean, quite honestly, if you can get a kid to develop a friendship with somebody, your job's done. Because so much more of the learning can happen in interaction. That is such a fruitful basis for us to actually tap into when it comes to helping kids to cope academically. And don't forget, friendships is about enjoyment. It's an affirming interaction, which is another reason why we really want to go full out to try and see if we can't get all kids to develop friends. So increased self-other awareness at this level is very important. Talking about, why do you think people respond certain ways? Why was I so upset about that? Why was Peter not upset about that? So that there's a mutual understanding developing in the class, and there are wonderful opportunities in the classroom to develop this. I mean, circle time, you always have opportunities like this. And you can make some. Increased interest in the other. Obviously, this is what you really want to try and encourage in a very sort of subtle way. Why do you think Peter would have done that? I think that's a very interesting thing that Peter did. You played in a very interesting way, or whatever you want to make the observation about. And you will certainly want to talk to parents about getting the kids opportunities for increased engagement, sleepovers and things like that. Obviously, as we go up the meaning-making scale, there's an increased awareness of emotional experiences. And I think this is a very important thing, again, that we have to be cognizant of in order to support students in the type of experiences that they might encounter when a friend is upset and they get upset as well. Okay, so level 4 is extensive meaning, where, as I said, this is where you have a situation where you have besties. You really have somebody you relate very closely to, that you can be socially close to. Participation oftentimes is high and varied. You can get a lot of participation. You can also be away from each other, but it doesn't really matter because these two kids really have quite a solid base for the interaction. It's across settings, and it can be distant. It can be on the, people sort of texting each other, things like that. They can be together for longer periods of times, and they really do enjoy that. There's an emotional investment from the kids, which obviously makes this a very vulnerable interaction, as we all know. But as we all know, it really is very important to deal with that vulnerability. And we can do that if we are actually in a situation where we start realizing what is the state of friendships between students. And then the important thing about versatility is that these are the kids that actually can become other people's friends so much easier. And that this kid don't necessarily have the need for another bestie, but they're normally your kids with that emotionally able to sort of interact with people on the different levels. So how do we intervene on this level? Obviously, friendship is a very delicate thread. And the moment we start by imposing any idea, it can only have negative consequences. So we don't want to go there. The art is how do we infuse ideas in a very indirect and subtle way in order to allow the kids to still be at the forefront of their own sort of friendship. That could enhance meaning making, and the way in which this level would manifest is ideas for new enhanced meaning. What kind of modification can we suggest to this game, or suggest to what they're doing already that might be of interest to the two of them to explore? Play in a slightly different way, experience a bit of change, but in a different way. Because the problem is if it becomes same old, that relationship is not going to last long. And quite honestly, relationships obviously don't necessarily last long. But again, if we're aware of this, we might be able to help them to steer towards a more meaningful relationship for a little bit of a longer time. Spontaneity of the change, that's important. It has to be the kids. And intuitive guidance from our side is what this really is about, based on emotional resonance observation. What makes this a very challenging intervention is that you cannot really intervene in the way in which we've been trained. And the other thing that I just want to say here is, if you don't feel emotionally resonant with the kids, it's better not to intervene at all, because you would tend to be too direct and impose things that would only be counterproductive. I can talk about that a lot because I see it a lot, but suffice for now. And as I said before, when you are at level 4, there's an ease with which you can deal with different intensity levels of friendships. The best way to facilitate the development of friendships is to allow a child to experience it. There's just, no amount of talking is going to do anything. But being in the same, being in the presence of another kid or other kids on an increased frequency level is certainly going to spark something. Whether we see it or observe it and can use what we see in order to facilitate it, that's a different matter altogether. In order to do that, though, help develop friendships, there's a couple of pointers. The first one is be at a distance. Know that friendships develop between two kids. You can't come in between. There cannot be a paraeducator next to the kid and think that the kid needs to develop friends. I mean, it's just not possible. Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes time to develop friendships, and quite honestly, they go up and down, and we have to allow for that. It's not about your agenda. It's not about my agenda for these kids. If we have it as a really important goal, that we want kids in the class, students in the class to develop friends, then we need to realize our commitment here is to look carefully at what the kids are doing in order to help them in their agenda to move forward. And that is a tremendous commitment, because it takes me out of my head and put me into the behavior of the kids, and in an effort to actually understand what is happening in action between this child and other children. So infuse ideas without imposing them, because this thin thread that develops between kids can so easily be broken. And it can oftentimes be broken in the classroom, where we're just insensitive and not able to sort of really encourage what in fact has developed already. Obviously, as kids become friends, there would be more disclosures that open up to each other, which is a really good thing. As long as we can support the children in actually doing it and dealing with it in order for them to be able to enrich their own friendship through it. I mentioned about the pitfalls in our social skills training. I mean, and I think it's very evident with the research that's available on masking and autism. The Dale Carnegie idea of here's the skills that you have to use in order to make friends, advice of creating inside joke, those things are all fine, but I mean, it becomes meaningless when it's another strategy that people should use. And the reason for that is because it's not me. It's not helping a kid to be authentic in the interactions with the other. So skills training and the issue of masking and autism is something we need to be very, very aware of, because it alienates the kids rather than help them to make friends. There's an interesting article I recently read about it was actually in the Asher Journal, in the Asher Leader, I think, about autistic play. And this woman, or the person who wrote it, I don't know if I could find. Yeah, it was basically, the article was saying something like, don't change autistic play, join in. In other words, and I like this, don't try and make kids who are, who have some autistic sort of characteristics to play according to what you want them to play. I mean, like, what's the purpose? But understand what the kids are doing and follow them, because that's actually the authentic way in which those kids will relate to it. And I know it's very foreign, because teachers in particular have a set of strategies that they want to use. But I think we need to look at the outcomes of what we're dealing with in order to start realizing that we have to develop alternative ways of actually dealing with kids in order to make kids happier, to help them to make friends, and to actually, quite honestly, achieve better. Because the price is too high if we don't do it. So obviously, it's not an easy type of intervention to follow, but and there are lots of challenges. Unpleasant behavior of students. How do you deal with unpleasant behavior in the classroom? Those kids never have friends. And quite honestly, a whole lot of why they don't have friends is the way we deal with it. Again, if our departure point is don't change, join in, I think our orientation towards a lot of these problems will change. I don't want to continue because, on that too much, but that is a very important part of actually understanding, the way to encourage rather than to impose certain ways of doing things. The other thing is, a very big challenge is obviously stress or pressure in the classroom. Kids can't be and enjoy being together if they're put under pressure all the time. And the art is how to do it. We have to have a curriculum that we complete and that we follow, but how do I actually do it in a way that help kids to interact with friends, to be able to sort of calm down and in order to sort of be creative together. And obviously a lot of that's got to do with following the children's pace, being able resonant with them so that when you can actually push a little bit more and when you really have to go back and be at a distance. The last point here is, don't forget that we are about giving a voice to each and every kid in the classroom. And we can't do that unless you follow the kid, because you're not really giving them a voice. When you give them a communication board or a device and say, okay, fine, push the buttons, to tell me things. A lot of that is stuff that we taught the kid, that the kid is basically regurgitating back. And we think it's wonderful, and yes, it is, because he has to learn how to operate the machine. But the problem is, operational competency does not allow for friendships to develop unless we're actually able to help the kid make the transition to realize that there's something like authentic communication. So, takeaway points from this presentation: friendship is not an all or nothing process. It's a continuum. And there are different types and there are different levels of engagement, and we have to acknowledge it because it's really important. So all of those levels are important for kids to be able to go through and enjoy. Friendship's spontaneous. It's a non-pressurizing situation. It's something that is, affirmative. And that we have to create a context where that becomes a realistic alternative. And obviously, friendship is based on self-other awareness. So we have to talk to kids, we have to observe, and we have to have fun around these issues. These self-observation, self and other observation in the classroom. And we have to keep thinking of opportunities for allowing kids to be together. The way forward? Well, two important things, I think. The one is formulate your goal, have the intention, be aware of your intention that you want to promote friendships between your kids. The second point is make sure you don't forget it. Sustain the attention to, the attention to the intention of promoting friendships, because that will help you a lot to see potential and opportunities for allowing kids to do things together and to be together in a situation where it might actually really be very beneficial to the overall learning. So instruction, obviously, that we do, is aimed at helping kids to master skills. Here's the important issue: the application of these skills, to help them to integrate it. That's where friendships become incredibly important. So when I talk to people who say, yes, well, I've got the math curriculum and in elementary school particularly, we don't have time for that. I'm saying, really? What's the application of the stuff that you're dealing with? What are you doing in order to help kids to understand the implication and the relevance of what they've just learned? That's the opportunity, because that's group work. That's where kids can actually have the freedom to select and sit down and just, engage with the kind of, and develop friendships, or at least a potential for interaction. Okay, so here are the references that I sort of have selected for this particular presentation. And obviously there's a lot more that I didn't put in here, but I think there's some pointers here. Thank you. I hope, I touched a couple of things that you might, find useful.
Oh my, oh Erna. I always love listening to you, and I'm going to say I wrote many things down. Authenticity, and I circled it. No pressure, and I circled it. Child-directed, and that what you said at the end really resonated with me, that application of what we're supporting kids, whether it's their language development, whether that's direct, is the application comes to life in their using those skills and abilities in the context of developing friendships. And I'll say one more thing that many people on this call have heard it before, but my daughter, who is now almost 40, oh my, when she was young and I was working at a hospital in Edmonton, she came in and was talking with a young woman who was a device user, single switch, blah, blah, blah. And so Megan and this gal, I don't know if they got, I'd have to think about where they came on your process, but they got beyond acquaintances, we'll say that. And Megan really learned how to engage with this other young girl. And then I asked Megan, my daughter, when this other young lady who was the same age as her, I think grade 7, no, probably grade 8 or grade 9, was going to go back to her local school. I said, so Meg, tell me how I can support the kind of conversations and interactions that you had. And she said, well, Mom, no one's going to talk to her. And I said, there's an adult beside her. There's an adult beside her. And so your talk about the paras, the people who are in the way instead of facilitators, are just by their presence potentially in the way, really resonated with me. But that's enough about me. Other folks on the chat, or Erna, if you want to say something about that, other people, do you have comments or questions or
No, I just think, I think your summary was really quite apt.
So tell me about, and because I've read your book and I love your book, but about the imbalances of language and how we deal with kids who I lovingly call mouth talkers versus kids who are aided communicators. Do you have any, I mean, I think you hit that in a variety of ways today, but
I'm not quite understanding the question. Are you saying, how do you get kids with totally asymmetrical skills? In other words, the one can talk, the other one can't, to interact with each other?
Well, and not, I guess, I mean, I think we know how to get them to interact, but how do we get out of the way and support that real, how do we teach the mouth talkers, which I lovingly call kids, to find ways to do meaning making the same way that you've tried to teach us as SLPs and teachers to do meaning making? Does that make sense?
Well, I think the very important thing is to make, to ignite interest in the other kid.
Yeah.
Because there's no authentic way of interacting with somebody if you don't really have interest. Fair enough. The way in which we do that, is something that we can only really do if we observe the kids and we know the kids with the kind of interest that the kid has, and to be able to in some way introduce something that might spark an interest between the kids. But there's a lot written about, and I think about this one situation where in fact the person describes her fetching her daughter at school. Mm-hmm. And she was in elementary school, and she was sitting at the back of the car talking to her other friend. And she was driving, this is the mother, and she heard a kid talk to the other kid about, yes, well, today I had to participate in this Friends program. And so the friend was saying, so what is that program? She said, oh, no, this is where you go at lunchtime and sit with the kids with special needs and pretend to be their friend.
Pretend to be their friend. Absolutely.
Well, the point is, kids are honest. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so I think this is the issue that I think is incredibly, that is harmful. Because the only person that really, it's a duty for kids to do that. And I think we have to really get past that in order for kids to understand that this is not a duty. You're missing out here. And why is it? Because you have no idea what it's like to use a system like this. Do you? No. So what would it really be like? I was wondering about, and if you can basically ignite in kids an interest in the other, and quite honestly, this is obviously a huge issue in diversity and multiculturalism as well. How do you show and how do you develop a genuine level of interest in others? So I'm not, I know that knowing what you can do helps you in terms of the repertoire that you have at the back of your head. But it's very important for you to look at the kids and to understand the basis. This is why I take time to talk about self and other, awareness, interest, because that's really the seat of the growth of friendship between kids and adults, obviously, for that matter.
I love it. So the words that are coming to my mind when you're saying that is to create the opportunity for authentic wonder, to authentically wonder about this other person and that they're there. And yeah. Oh, I think we have much. I'm just going to speak for myself. I have much to reflect on what you've said and what we need to do and how we need to do it to create those opportunities for authentic, child-directed, child-focused engagements and to help seed authentic wonder in all kids about each other. And I'll just sort of say one more thing that I really came to my mind. I remember a classroom, and bless her soul, the teacher thought she was doing the right thing, but she had a little thing, a cup in the front of her classroom, and in that cup were popsicle sticks. And every day she would pull out the popsicle stick of the kid that was going to be the friend with the child with a disability in that room. And at that time, it kind of raised the hackles on my back, but I didn't have the wonderful insights that you've given us today to say why that was so wrong and potentially has the opposite effect of what anybody was trying to do.
Yeah, and if I can just say, the
Sure.
worst thing about this is it negates the kid, who use AAC in the process, because friendship is something very personal. And I would take a lot more time with that child in order to take the popsicles and help the kid choose, or encourage him to choose different partners, but to put him in a situation where, in fact, there's acknowledgement of his own voice.
Exactly. Beautiful. There's a question.
Okay.
Says, my wonder is how peer mentoring, so peers mentoring, could support authentic opportunities to increase the time and frequency together to further friendships up the level. So Kim is thinking about peers that are mentoring each other and how that, or can that be supported for authentic, or is that?
Look, I think one has to be very careful with, obviously it depends how you define mentoring, but mentoring normally has an asymmetrical quality to it. And I think we should stay clear of thinking that a situation like that, where you have a mentor and a mentee, is going to be congenial for the development of friendships. I mean, it's the same thing of, getting peer tutors and that kind of stuff. We need to be very careful. Friendship is a very personal thing. It's something that develops between kids. They don't need a mentor and a mentee role. And I think the moment we start looking at roles that each have to play, we move away from authenticity. So in any case, obviously there's no sort of easy way to sort of deal with it, but I'm always very cautious about any roles assigned to kids and think that it's going to be congenial for development of friendship.
Yeah. Thank you, and I would concur.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Erna, as she has given us, I want to say, much to ponder and reflect on in her talk today, much that I need to reflect on and wonder about in my own life, my own practice. Anyone else have any thoughts before we let her go? I told you, Erna, they're not a talkative group, these guys.
That's fine, I'm quiet. Anyway, thank you very much. It was lovely talking to you.
It was lovely having you, and I look forward to people pondering this and thinking about ways to enable authentic child-directed friendships that we support, not intervene. All right, enough. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. Excellent points to consider.
Keep well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.